begin with number 10, we're going to start with a horse, and well, it seems almost unlikely that a horse that's won two mile champion chases, Moscow Flyer, could actually be 10th in anybody's list, but well, we've got 9 that I think are better coming along. But for me, had to be named purely for the fact he's only been beaten once when he's completed over fences. He was almost top class over hurdles. Remember him nearly getting the better of Isterback one day at Leopardstown. But when he went chasing, he was an absolute revelation. A really intelligent horse. I went over and rode him actually just before he won his second 2 mile chase over at Jessica Harrington's, and really unimpressive. He's just a smashing horse. You know, you sit on him, you think, God, he, you know, just make a nice hack. He's got wonderful manners, great temperament, and they do a lot of their work on a sand surface. Doesn't even feel particularly talented, but when he gets to the race course, he just seems to come alive. He's a great jumper. Yeah. You know, it's ironic that a couple of times that he's fallen, Barry Gerrit has always said it's just overconfidence, if anything, or just lack of concentration, because he's got tremendous scope. You know, can come up from anywhere, really athletic. The one thing is he's very well balanced, you know, when you sit on him. He's not overly big.
I think 2 mile chases are the most exciting of all, and we haven't seen a better one than him for quite a few years now. And he's kept it going for a long time. He's a veteran now, isn't he? But he's still as good as ever.
Well, he went to it quite late, in actual fact. You know, he won an Oracle first season that they sent him chasing.
Moscow Flyer is drawing away now, and it's another win for Ireland in only the second race. 2 out of 2. Moscow Flyer wins the Oracle.
And, you know, because when you've got a horse he was top class over hurdles, you know, if it hadn't been for Isterback being about, you know, who knows what would have happened.
Isterback, Mantle sprints and Stage Affair on the outside with the slight advantage. Moscow Flyer's coming back at them, and Isterback's fallen. Isterback has fallen at the final flight. So they were rightly persuaded to keep him over hurdles for quite a time. And it's difficult for horses, once they get into that hurdling habit, to actually change their style a bit, and it is a different style once you start jumping fences. You've got to be able to round your back a little bit and you know, have a little bit more caution. But he was bright enough that it, you know, when he began, it didn't take him long to you know, get his act into gear.
Moscow Flyer chased by Azertiop and World Chief at the final fence. Moscow Flyer by a length and a half.
He's equally good left and right-handed. I mean, you could say some of his best performances have come at Sandown in those limited handicaps.
Oh, wonderful. And he runs his race every single time. You know, he's been running against the likes of Azertiop, and, you know, they've tried different ways to beat him, and unless he's fallen, they haven't succeeded. But, you know, they can take him on, or they can hold him up or do whatever. But he's always just got the upper hand, and you just see him, you know, just tweak his ears a couple of times. And you always just think, yeah, there was a little bit more left in your locker. And that's, you know, that's how it's proved to be.
Moscow Flyer is holding World Chief. World Chief is a gutsy battler. He's grinding away in second place. Moscow Flyer, though, keeps up the gallop from World Chief. And Moscow Flyer is magnificent and is champion again.
John, at number 9, you've chosen a wonderful old hurdler, Sea Pigeon, who won the champion hurdler at the ripe old age of 11, ridden by your good self.
Yeah, I was slightly embarrassed about picking him, really, because I certainly didn't want to be showing the one time that I rode him in the champion hurdle, but he was just such a wonderful horse. And even if I'd never sat on him, he'd still have been definitely in my top 10. You know, he was good enough to run in the Derby when Jeremy Tree had him. And then Gordon Richards trained him for a bit. And then he ended up with Peter Easterby, and remarkable flat horse. You know, he won the Ebor with top weight when John Joe O'Neill rode him and almost got touched off on the line. Luckily for John Joe, that tape's gone AWOL. Nobody's seen it since the day. And Mark Birch, of course, was really successful with him.
Yeah, for all his great qualities, he was twice beaten by Monksfield in the champion hurdle. He got to the point that people said he's not brave enough, or he won't come up the hill. He'll never win a champion hurdle.
It's Monksfield from Sea Pigeon, and Monksfield is holding Sea Pigeon.
When he got beaten a couple of times by Monksfield, he used to get to the front.
It's Monksfield on the near side, Sea Pigeon on the far side.
And then you thought that he'd done enough. And he used to just down tools, you know, he'd said, hang on, you know, I've done a bit, and that was it.
He's going to win it. Monksfield wins it from Sea Pigeon. Monksfield wins the champion hurdle from Sea Pigeon second.
But remarkable to have a horse who had so much talent off the flat and then had the guts to go jumping.
Monksfield and Sea
Sea Pigeon is a repeat of last year. The same two fighting it out. Sea Pigeon coming there on the near side. And Sea Pigeon's going to avenge that defeat of last year. He's striding up to the line, the veteran 10-year-old. He's won it at last. Sea Pigeon wins the champion hurdle.
By then he was an old pro. By the time you won the champion hurdle, he was an old pro. So was he still wanting to go? Could you feel him wanting him to go before you let him go?
Well, what he did, he travelled well. It was a sort of balancing act, you know, just trying to get him to switch off. And jumping the first in the champion hurdle, there was a horse in front of me, and it's just how your luck goes. I thought, am I going to go left or right of it, you know, because he used to like to come from behind. I thought I'd just go right-handed. The horse in front fell and rolled to the left, and so things sometimes do just go your way. And then when you're at the top of the hill and you're just thinking, well, I wonder when I'm just going to press the button on this, is a great feeling. Normally you're thinking, God, you know, 3 round the backside, and maybe I'll get into a position where, you know, I'm only 6 lengths off the leader. This thing, you know, was just ready to take you. You know, most jump races, you know, they turn out to be wars of attrition. This was just class through and through, and, you know, just make sure that, you know, you get it right, you know.
And what was memorable about that, if I'm sparing your blushes, was that you jumped the last and took a bull and waited. It was extraordinary. Most people will go and try and win a race before the last, particularly even earlier than that, but you knew what you had under you, and you waited and waited and then delivered him. It must have been a fantastic feeling to go and win the race on the hill.
Well, it's not very often that you ride a horse in a champion hurdle and, you know, turning down the hill. It's just a question of when you're going to let out a reef of rain, and it's slightly different jumping to flat. You know, if you hold a horse up, ideally, instead of jumping the last almost upsides at Cheltenham, I should have been jumping it 3 lengths down, but if you go and miss it, and then suddenly the horse comes under pressure, so, you know, taking a little bit of a chance there.
He's going to win it as they come up towards the line. Sea Pigeon wins the champion hurdle. Sea Pigeon has just won it from Pollardstown and Durning Run.
He was a special horse. Aside from the time that I rode him in the champion hurdle, he was a definite top 10 contender.
John, your next choice is a man who could be in either of your lists and fully deserves to be in them. He is, of course, David Ellsworth.
Well, he is a genuine legend. He is in my book. He's not everybody's cup of tea, David. He can rub people up the wrong way without even trying. But in terms of training horses and making them last and being as close to them as you'll ever want to get, he's as good as there is. Doesn't matter whether they're flat horses, 2-year-olds, older horses, you know, the likes of Persian Punch. Any number of good 2-year-olds he's had, the jumpers, he's just got an incredibly gifted way with horses.
Brian's going absolutely wild. They've got one to jump, and it's Desert Orchid. He comes to take it, and he's jumped it brilliantly. This was his race.
His name is indelibly linked with the great Desert Orchid.
Yeah, Desert Orchid, Rhyme and Reason. God, the list is endless of the good horses that he's had through his hands, and all of them bought by him, brought along by him.
It's Desert Orchid on the inside of Vocatini. Desert Orchid by a length and a half. Oh, a brilliant jump by Desert Orchid.
When you mention Desert Orchid, it's always standing off a stride too soon, get in there, ears pricked, legs right out in front of him. Just a fantastic horse and brilliantly handled.
He won the King George 4 times. And perhaps most memorably of all, he won the Gold Cup. He didn't act so well left-handed, did he? He was definitely a stone better right-handed. But that day at Cheltenham, I remember it rained so hard during the morning and at lunchtime, there were fears that he would be pulled out because he was definitely a better horse on decent ground. And it was a bog by the time they raced. But Elsie was always going to run him because Elsie he's a competitor, like his horses. And it came the great race, and Yahoo goes clear down the hill, and then Desert Orchid gets to him. Then up the hill, Yahoo comes back at him. It looks as though he's going to get collared.
Yahoo from Desert Orchid, and Desert Orchid looks as though he's tiring in the ground. Yahoo, who loves the mud, is full of running at the second last. Yahoo jumps from Desert Orchid, but Desert Orchid is running. He's trying to come again towards the near side. It's Yahoo on the far side, Desert Orchid towards the near side. Desert Orchid's accelerating as they come to the last.
And I remember Desert Orchid going across like a fighter, saying, "You're not having this, this is mine." And he intimidated Yahoo, didn't he? He wanted it more than Yahoo.
And you could almost sense him hurting while he was doing it. He was already, you know, going through and probably gone through the pain barrier.
Desert Orchid is going to win it. Desert Orchid has won the Gold Cup. Yahoo is
David Ellsworth, you know, saying being competitive, he is. I mean, nobody wants to win races more than him, but never at the detriment of his horses.
No.
Wouldn't matter whether he'd taken one to Melbourne to run in their big race down there. If he didn't think the horse was right, straight back in the box and bring it home again. And that's why he was in this list, and quite comfortably so, because apart from having that feel and, you know, just intuition, if you like, you know, he also got a lot of compassion to go with it.
John, your choice at number 7 is Michael Dickinson, a man who turned jumping literally on its head for 3 or 4 amazing years before heading off for new challenges on the flat.
Oh, he was incredible. Had a complete turnaround about how jumpers were prepared. You know, he was the first guy to start interval training. A great thinker, came from a good background. He was well bred. Mother Monica and father Tony, who held the license initially, really good horsemen, good feeders, good buyers of horses. You know, just generally good stockmen. But Michael had an incredible, and still has an incredible brain. You know, never stops thinking. You know, phone you up at 2 o'clock in the morning from America and say, "Oh, I've got this idea about an all-weather gallop. What do you think?" And he's not completely, you know, not remotely interested in what you've got to think.
No.
He's just sort of bouncing ideas, and you might come up with something. The attention to detail with Michael Dickinson. People say, "Oh, all good trainers, you know, it's the little things." With him, it was the extra little things. He was just a real fanatic. But I had quite a few rides for Michael, and what was extraordinary is normally, you know, you'll ride for a trainer and they'll say, "Oh, well, you know, sit second or third and, you know, just see how he runs." Michael would sit down, it's like he'd already watched the race. You know, he'd say, "Well, you know, make sure you're, you know, not too far off the leader, and you'll be 4th, and these 3 will beat you." And sure enough, that's exactly what had happened.
So I don't think he should mind firm going that much. So with your permission, so I'd like to run. Okay, thank you very much.
I rode Bregorn and Wayward Lad, rode Silverbuck, lots of good horses. They had, you know, just one good horse after another.
Wayward Lad on the near side, Silverbuck on the far side. $50 more in between these two as they jump the final fence. They're in the air together, they touch down together. $50 more, Wayward Lad and Silverbuck. And it's Wayward Lad on the near side, $50 more fighting back. Wayward Lad from $50 more and Silverbuck. Wayward Lad, $50 more, Silverbuck. Wayward Lad wins it from $50 more in second place.
Nobody will ever train the first 5 in a Gold Cup. Absolutely guaranteed you can have whatever you like on it, that nobody will have the first 3, never mind the first 5. Absolutely incredible performance.
It was a sensation at the time, wasn't it? Let alone to have 5 good horses, all that were fit enough and well enough to go for the Gold Cup, all with a chance.
Quite incredible. You know, 5 good horses. You know, so many things go wrong with horses between buying them, getting them ready, and getting them ready to run for their lives on the day. On that particular day in March, every one of those horses was at the peak of its career. Never ever did one of those get any better. They were ready to run for their lives.
Bregorn striding up to the line to win it. Bregorn wins the Gold Cup. 2nd is Captain John and 3rd is Wayward Lad. And 4th is going to be Silverbuck. An amazing 1, 2, 3, 4 for the Michael Dickinson quartet, and he's going to achieve the 5th because Ashley House runs on to be 5th.
I can remember saying to Fred one day, you know, when Michael was just beginning to, you know, get close to the top, and I said to, and I'd ridden quite a bit for him, and I said to Fred, "Look," I said, "you're going to have to start having a plan, you know, with these horses, you know." But up until that point, you used to say, "Well, then it's almost ready, we'll run it," you know, and Thursday morning at 9 o'clock, still wasn't sure whether it was going to run on the Saturday. Michael would know 2 weeks in advance that this is the plan for this. And Fred said, "Oh," he said, "we've never had a plan." And I said, "Well, I think you better, you know, think about starting to get one." And very much in the same mould as Martin Pipe. They have a set target for the horses, and if they don't run along the lines, if they're not going to meet it, then they'll have another plan. But it won't be an afterthought to the first one. It will be already in place. If this doesn't work, we're going to do that, that and that. And he really changed the face of jump racing. You know, we'd had Fulk Warwin, Fred Winter, Fred Rymel, right up to one point, and then Michael Dickinson came along and said, "Right, we're going to have a new approach to this."
He would never settle for what he had. He was always restlessly looking for new challenges. Are you surprised that he hasn't dominated flat racing in the way that he dominated jump racing? What's gone wrong?
I think the main problem when he went to Manton and started working for Robert Sangster was he had a lot of big backward 3-year-olds. You know, everybody was expecting him to clean up on the flat, and I think given time he would have done so. But ultimately it didn't work out, and you know, a little bit like football managers, you know, people paying the bills are fairly, you know, short when it comes to how much time they give people to be successful. But he's been relatively successful since he's gone to America, and yes, I am surprised that he hasn't been more successful over there. But the fact remains, he changed the face of jump racing, and the 5-timer at Cheltenham will stand him in anybody's top 10.
Absolutely. John, the British love their heroes, almost more so sometimes when they're the losers rather than the winners. And your choice at number 6 is one of the most famous losers of a race ever.
I know, Crisp, I can't believe I didn't put him top of the list, because he was just an absolute giant. I can remember when he came from Australia, they used to train him out of doors over there. He used to just go and knock the snow off of his rug. And he was in the bottom yard, and I used to just take him, sit on his back, just have a bridle on, jump up on his back with no saddle and just ride him around the village, and he was just, you know, a really smashing person.
What a horse this Australian horse is, Crisp. He's coming to the final fence now after this blistering gallop.
He was a great jumper. He won the 2-mile champion chase at Cheltenham with Paul Calloway.
He jumps it cleanly and beautifully, and he's getting a great reception. This is a fine performance, this. Here's Crisp striding away with the National Hunt 2-mile champion chase.
Everybody remembers him for the effort. Probably the best performance of any National Hunt horse in the history of jump racing, when he tried to give £23 to Red Rum.
In a record time.
Record time.
And the horse that beat him came out and won 2 Grand Nationals.
Absolutely incredible, and it breaks my heart to watch that in the first circuit of the race, which is what he should be remembered for, when he made those fences at Liverpool look like hurdles. He jumped so far out at Beecher's Brook that he'd gone beyond the drop.
Beecher's, Grey Sombrero over and just clears it from Crisp in second, Black Secret third.
And as they go towards the next fence, it's Crisp, the clear leader, from Grey Sombrero, Endless Folly, Black Secret. Then comes Great Noise.
And coming to the chair now, this is one of the biggest, and Crisp, his ears pricked, jumps it beautifully in the lead. He just pegged a little bit but got away with it. Grey Sombrero was very near, he's gone. Grey Sombrero was gone at that one. Grey Sombrero fallen. And as they run down to the Milling Road, Crisp is a long way clear of the remainder.
And Crisp just jumping the 17th. He's over jumped it beautifully, a long way clear.
And Richard Pittman on Crisp, and what a fantastic ride he's having. I can't remember a horse so far ahead in the Grand National at this stage. As Crisp comes on his own to Beecher's Brook for the second time. Crisp, the top weight, Richard Pittman, over it in tremendous style.
And he's conceding 1 stone 9 to his pursuer, Crisp. It's Crisp in the lead from Red Rum, but Red Rum still making ground on him.
I mean, poor Richard Pittman, he was slated for, you know, not being stronger, and, you know, maybe should have put his whip down in the finish. Forget all of that. The ride that he gave that horse for the first 4 miles of the contest was absolutely copybook. Absolutely gave him the ride of his life, and so did the horse, to be fair.
200 yards now for Crisp, and Red Rum still closing on him, and Crisp is getting very tired.
He was absolutely unconscious for the last quarter of a mile of the race, and you could just see that sheepskin noseband of Red Rum just bobbing up and down, knowing what was going to happen. It was just awful, just made you want to cry. I remember sitting in Fred's hostel watching it, and it was just desperate watching it.
And about 18 months later, after that unforgettable Grand National, the 2 horses met at levels at Doncaster over something like 3.25 miles, and Crisp absolutely bolted up. But great credit to him that that defeat didn't break his heart.
Oh, nothing would break his heart. He was an absolute phenomenon, this horse. He was as hard as nails. And some horses, you know, you can't quite tell what they're like from looking at them. You know, they belie their looks. He looked hard. When you saw him stripped off at evening stables, he was big, strong, quite sort of angular, but muscle. You know, he'd have been John Conte if he'd been a human being.
John, we've talked already about Michael Dickinson, who changed the face of jumping for a few years, but your choice at number 5, Martin Pipe, has changed it for 2 generations.
Oh, he's been amazing. Won more races than anybody else, and he doesn't mind whether it's a selling hurdle at Taunton, much prefers it to be a champion hurdle at Cheltenham. But he has taken training to a completely different level. And part of me wishes that he tried his hand more on the flat, because from a relatively few horses, he's been remarkably successful, you know, when he's tried his hand at that code. But in terms of jumping, he's an absolute world apart from everybody else.
Baron Blakeney putting in a tremendous run as they race towards the line. It's broadsword from Baron Blakeney. It's going to be a photo finish. Baron Blakeney's just going to get up at the line. Baron Blakeney wins it from broadsword. Another great triumph for the Martin Pipe and Peter Scudamore combination as Bonanza Boys strides ahead to land a big gamble in the Coral Welsh National. Minnie Homer and just so as the race towards the line. Minnie Homer is going to win the National from Just So. Minnie Homer has won it. Just So is second.
I sent a horse down to him about 3 years ago, and within 24 hours he'd watched every video of this horse. He'd spoken to all the jockeys that had ridden it, and he said, this is the plan, and if this doesn't work, we're going to do that. Now, normally you send it to a horse to a trainer and they say, well, we'll keep him for a month and we'll see what, you know, see how he goes, and we'll see this. None of that. No, you know, nothing's left to chance. He's got a bank of televisions running full time in the office. He stands in the paddock and he's making notes on everybody's horse, seeing whether his horse compares to it, whether something doesn't look fit, and maybe you're going to go and bite. He goes on holiday with his form books. Must be a nightmare to live with, the poor Carol. But in terms of having a trainer and wanting to send a horse to somebody, he'd be top of my list. He's absolutely fantastic.
And John, unusually for a trainer, almost uniquely for a trainer, he's entirely self-taught. He didn't work for another trainer. He didn't learn the trade from other trainers. He bought books on training. He bought books on people who kept horses in the First World War. I remember doing a piece on him. He took a fortnight's holiday and went on a vet's course at a college in Worcester. He wanted to learn every side of the game, but as I say, it was self-taught. He didn't go and learn at the knee of another trainer.
You know, you say when he started, you know, he used to go off on veterinary courses. He still goes. You know, you'll turn up to places that no other trainer's at. He'll be there making notes. And interestingly, time and time again, goes back to old-fashioned methods, you know, when it comes to getting horses right. And there've been no end of people say, oh, he must be doing this, he's blood doping them, he's doing this, he's doing that. If you go racing regularly, watch his horses walking around the paddock, they A, always look happy, they're B, always relaxed. Must be an absolutely joy to ride. I rode, you know, any number of winners for him when I was riding, and they were always the same. Got on them, did their job, didn't pull, took their place in the race, never ever got to the bottom of them. They used to keep jumping, keep trying. Even the ones that, you know, found the jumping difficult still used to have the stamina to pick themselves up and be competitive.
Martin has made his name training horses of all sizes and shapes, but he's also been good at picking horses from other yards, either from the sales or from claimers and sellers. And some of his better horses, one of his best horses, for instance, Make a Stand, he got cheaply out of a claimer off the flat.
Yeah, in many ways, that's one of his main reasons for success, is that he said, hang on, we're now racing on ground that invariably is much quicker than it was years gone by. Drainage is much better on race courses. I'm not going to go for these big chasing types. I'm going to go for a much smaller, wiry type flat horse, if you like, and teach them to jump. If they've got the heart, you know, and they're big enough, they'll get away with it. And Make a Stand is a perfect example. He was quite a decent horse when Henry Candy had him, but he never fulfilled his potential until Martin got hold of him, and of course went on and won a champion hurdle. And in a typical Martin Pipe style, he loves horses to get out there, be competitive. You know, how many times do you see one of Martin's horses, you know, making the run in, other horses come to them and they keep pegging along.
It's Make a Stand who wins it. Theatre World is second, Space Trucker third.
And he's been tremendous for jockeys. You know, just about every champion jockey since I retired has been attached to Martin Pipe. You know, he turns out 200 winners a year, and it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're David Bridgewater, Peter Scudamore, Richard Dunwoody or Tony McCoy, you know you're going to be guaranteed any number of winners every year.
John, at number 4, you've chosen a mare who holds a unique place in the hearts of jumping fans, Dawn Run, only horse ever to win the Gold Cup and the Champion Hurdle.
I wanted to have joint 10 number 1s here because, you know, it's really difficult making a decision, but anyway, a decision had to be made. But she was an extraordinary mare to win a Champion Hurdle and a Gold Cup.
And she was very special when she won the Champion Hurdle. If you remember, Seema looked like winning with Peter Scudamore. She showed that toughness of spirit, the independence. She would not be defied.
Yeah, well, every horse that we've spoken about, whether it be flat or jumping, they all just stick their heads out. No horse, you know, goes through a career without going through the pain barrier on any number of occasions, and there's quite a number that go through it once and say not again, and you can't blame them for that. But she was prepared to go through it and come out the other side.
Seema on the near side and Dawn Run on the far side. Dawn Run from Seema as they race into the closing stages. It's Dawn Run from Seema, and as they come to the line, Dawn Run has won it from Seema and very promising his start.
Will it happen again? Will the horse win both races?
Hopefully it will. Of course, what happens these days is that, you know, there's big money to be earned with good hurdlers, and that's why Moscow Flyer was easily in this top 10, because he'd been at the top over hurdles and a 2-mile champion chaser, and he's done really well. But you're always tempted to keep them just that little bit too long, and they get into bad habits hurdling. We tried it at Fred's. We had Beulah and Lanzarote, both champion hurdlers. Both went to chasing too late and both paid the ultimate penalty for it.
Dawn Run, this only her 4th race over fences, but certainly her best performance of jumping so far. And this is the last open ditch, and she's a bit close, and she's gone! She's gone! And Tony Mullins has landed on his feet.
There was a fair bit of controversy at the time, if you recall, John, because Tony Mullins, being Paddy Mullins' son, stable jockey, Irish champion jockey, good jockey, had ridden Dawn Run in some of her races over hurdles, but not in the Champion Hurdle. He then rode her in a practice round at Cheltenham when she fell at the top of the hill. And Paddy said, well, no matter, my boy will ride him in the Gold Cup. But the Hills were absolutely adamant that Tony Mullins wouldn't ride, and that they wanted John Joe.
Yeah.
And although it was a great day for everybody, I know Paddy Mullins still feels the hurt that his son didn't ride the mare in that Gold Cup.
It was a difficult decision for the owners and also for Paddy Mullins. But you've got to say, ultimately, with every respect to Tony, he's not John Joe O'Neill. He definitely wouldn't have won a Gold Cup on her. All of these horses, there's always something special that sticks in the memory. And just that moment when they jump the second last at Cheltenham and you think, she can't win, and then all of a sudden, John Joe galvanised her. I can't think of one other jockey could have won on her on that occasion.
Run and Skip, Dawn Run, Wayward Lad and Forgive and Forget coming there strongly on the stand side at the second last. Run and Skip, Dawn Run, Wayward Lad, Forgive and Forget still coming there.
And she just stuck her head down and wanted to win, and virtually no experience over fences. She'd only had 3 or 4 runs.
In the lead from Wayward Lad, Forgive and Forget on the near side, Wayward Lad on the far side. It's Wayward Lad, the veteran, trying to break his Cheltenham Hoodoo, being pressed now by Dawn Run in the centre. Forgive and Forget on the near side as they race to the line, and the mare's beginning to get up, and as they come to the line, she's made it. Dawn Run has won it. Dawn Run has won it from Wayward Lad.
The reception when she came back in, everybody at Cheltenham that day knew that they'd seen something special. They'd seen a horse in the best race of the season win when she shouldn't have won. You know, her heart and his courage together, it was just fantastic. It was absolutely tragic when she got killed in France in their French champion hurdle. But to win a champion hurdle and a Gold Cup, and the manner of her victory in the Gold Cup, that was what was special.
And the mare's beginning to get up. She's made it. Dawn Run has won it. John Joe O'Neill punches the air as the mare has made turf history here at Cheltenham.
Well, we're heading towards the summit now, John, and at number 3 you've picked a horse that was certainly the best champion hurdler of modern times. He won 3 champion hurdles. With any luck at all, it would have been 4. It is, of course, Isterback.
Yes, fantastic horse, and a good story to go along with it. A sad story in many ways, because he was bought initially for John Durkin, well, by John Durkin, who was here in Lambourne, who was, you know, good friend of mine, particularly good friend of Jamie Osborne's and Eddie Hale's, and sadly he died before he saw the horse fulfill his true potential. But he won 3 champion hurdles. He won the novice hurdle at Cheltenham in his first season, and probably had to work as hard to win that as he did in any of his champion hurdles.
2.5, wasn't it?
Yeah, 2.5 miles.
But it's a red-hot favourite, Istabrack, battling up the field, but coming back at him is Mighty Moss and also Garena. It's going to be very close, but Istabrack is going to take it at the line. Istabrack wins for Ireland. Charlie Swan knows it.
And then was denied a 4th win because of the foot and mouth. And for all the classics that Aidan O'Brien has won, I should think 3 victories with Istabrack in the champion hurdle. When he sits down to write a book about, you know, horses that are giving him most satisfaction, I'd be really surprised if he's not top of his list.
Because the champion hurdle this year, the Smurfit champion hurdle, goes to the Irish on St Patrick's Day. It's Istabrack and Charlie Swan who win.
Charlie Swan was brilliant on him. I mean, he was a really quick jumper, you know, he used to, you know, absolutely gone like a, you know, greyhound. And a lot of pressure on him, you know, probably more pressure when he was going for his 3rd champion hurdle than anything else. And to just be in the right place, you know, you're trying to look out for other horses. You know you're on the best horse, but always looking out to make sure you're not going to be behind something that's just going to miss a hurdle or something silly's going to be happen. And Charlie's as cool as a cucumber.
Nice cool, wasn't
yeah,
he?
you know, JP used to say to him, you know, riding with balls of steel. Well, you know, they were probably to tame him on 2 occasions.
And Istabrack's going on to win his 3rd Smurfit champion hurdle. 4 festival wins running for Istabrack in the champion, a champion of champions.
And this was a horse, you say he was a very quick jumper, but he was sometimes too quick. He took at least 2 dreadful falls which could have killed him. Seemed to not affect his confidence one bit.
No, well, it's the same as everything, isn't it? Same as, you know, jockeys. You know, you see the real good lads, you know, they'll have a bad fall, they just put it straight to the back of their mind, get on. They've only got one thing that they're interested in, and that's winning, and that was, you know, that was Istabrack.
But Istabrack is a true champion, the epitome of a champion, bravely coming up the hill. Theatre World come through for a second. Istabrack is the winner of the Smurfit champion hurdle.
What might have been doesn't pay the bills, but had the meeting gone ahead that 4th year and the foot and mouth hadn't happened, would Istabrack have won that 4th champion hurdle?
I don't think there's any doubt about that. A lot of people have said, oh, well, you know, there weren't a lot of good horses around at the time. Forget about that. He was top dog 3 years running, 4 years running at Cheltenham, any horse. There are very few that have won 4 races at the festival.
One of your noisier colleagues on Channel 4 Racing likes to call you the greatest jockey, but you have no doubt that that title belongs to another rider.
Well, he only calls me that because he knows it annoys me, but since I packed up, you know, there's been any number of jockeys that have been riding at a different level, probably in terms of fitness more than anything, but Tony McCoy has taken the whole game up 3 gears. I could talk for an hour on his main attributes, but if you press me on one, it's his will to win and making horses jump from the second those gates go up. He goes to the first fence and wants to get that horse over it as fast as it can.
And Edredon Bleu, who are expecting to make the running, is one of the first to show.
And jump it as well as he can. So many jockeys just go down to the first, sit on horses and wait to see what they do.
As they fly to fence number 2, Edredon Bleu lands in front.
And as a rider, I know that jumping the first is more important than anything else. And the way you jump the first sets a horse up for the remainder. You miss the first out, you'll guarantee you'll miss the second. Jump off the first with the right attitude and you're away.
Over the third, and Edredon Bleu continues in front, but he hasn't gone burning off as perhaps he might have done in the hands of Tony McCoy.
He's as hard as they come, not particularly hard on horses, but he's hard on himself. I should think his pain threshold is totally different to most other sportsmen. He'd be a Lance Armstrong. If he was a cyclist, you know, it wouldn't bother him if his, you know, leg was broken in 3 places. Well, I'll cycle 1 leg. He's as brave as a lion,
Edredon Bleu has led all the way so far, but both Flagship Uberalis on the outside and Direct Route on the inside are waiting to pounce. Here's 3 out, Edredon Bleu over first.
I've seen lots of good jockeys that are brave, jockeys that were good horsemen, some that were just good at the riding, but he's got everything.
The favourite on the far side, Flagship Uberalis, the final fence, 3 in a line, Edredon Bleu just in front from Direct Route, Flagship Uberalis on the far side, Edredon Bleu challenged all the way up the hill by Direct Route putting his nose in front, Edredon Bleu flights back on the near side, the bombing finish, very tight, Direct Route far side, on the near side, Edredon Bleu.
Time and again, you watch him and you think, oh well, that horse is beaten, and he just gets that little bit extra out of them. Pridwell, when he beat Isterback up at Liverpool, epitomised what he was all about, you know, just didn't want to be beaten. He was on a horse that was running against a horse that was better than he was, on a horse that was a right old monkey that 9 times out of 10 said, hang on, I've done enough and that is enough, but he just made him go about his business, forced him over the line.
Says go on, Isterback now ranges up towards to tackle Pridwell for the lead. Isterback on the near side gaining the upper hand now from Pridwell. They're about 15 lengths in front of Karawi. A real slog to the line, but it's Isterback who's sticking his neck out well on the near side. Pridwell is fighting back. Pridwell coming back at Isterback. Pridwell on the far side grabbing a narrow lead close home, and Pridwell has got up to win. He's pulled it out of the fire.
For a long period of his career, he was riding 7 pounds lighter than he probably should have been, because he's a very tall lad, isn't he?
Oh, he's a big lad, but you know, there's plenty of them are. You know, the likes of Ruby Walsh, Barry Geraghty. At the moment, there's Paul Carby. You know, he's riding at the top level against some really good lads at the moment. You know, there's a handful of them that are exceptional.
At the height of your championship, you won 131 races, I think, in a season. AP regularly rides over 200 winners and once got very close to 300. That's a hell of a change in 20, 25 years. It
is a big change. You've got all year round racing now. Martin Pipes kicked the whole thing up a gear. 2 meetings in an afternoon, you know, but even allowing for that, it's still an incredible number of winners. You know, when you see how many races there are in a year and see the percentage that just 4 or 5 jockeys win, you know, it's got the jumping game's got very small in numbers of jockeys these days, but he is somebody that, you know, switch on the TV, and if Tony McCall is riding, I'll sit down and watch a race. Otherwise, normally I'll just go out and do something else, like golf. You know, if Tiger Woods is playing, you sit and watch it, otherwise you won't. And you know, that's what he is for me.
Your #1 jumping legend is, more than any other of your choices, a personal one. He was your hero, he was everybody's hero, Fred Winter. Well,
he was ultimately. You know, when I went to work for him in 1969, never even heard of him, just went there by chance. And from the second I started, I just realised that I'd gone somewhere a little bit special. I had a great team, I had Brian Delaney, who was the head lad. But he was a wonderful person, great family man, and just a man of immense integrity. In 15 years of riding there, and I started my career there, finished it there at Uplands, we never had one horse went out of that yard that wasn't doing less than its best. And everything from day one was done with the horse's interests at heart. We had a tremendous string. I can remember we had the likes of Sonny Summers, Pendle, Beulah, Killiney, Lanzarote,
You had what they called Millionaires Row, didn't you?
Millionaires Row.
Racing up towards the line, and here's Beulah getting a storming reception from the crowd as he goes to win his second champion hurdle. It's going to be a near thing for second and third places, with Life at Key running on strongly to challenge Boxer. At the line, Beulah's the winner, then comes Boxer in second place, third.
You talk about your days as an apprentice with Fred. When you joined him, you had a good background in pony clubs and show jumping. You obviously were very talented, but you were quite heavy when you went there, weren't you?
I was. I remember at the interview going down and he said, look, you know, you're a big lad, you know, you've got big hands and big feet. He said your biggest problem, because I didn't want to go there and be an apprentice for 3 years and not get any rides and not do any good. And he said, your biggest problem's going to be your weight. He said, you know, what's the lightest you've ever been? So I said, about 7 pounds 3 ounces, I think. And he didn't have a great sense of humour, Fred, but there's a sort of a smirk came across his face. And anyway, I did my bit, and I was struggling. I was 11 stone 7 when I went there. And I got to the point, I rode a winner for somebody else, a guy called Godfrey Berth. On my first ride, it managed to take me around. I was fairly, you know, I was struggling. I had a physic and I'd had a pee pill. So I was fairly ineffective from about 2 miles out in a 2.5 mile race. But then I'd had enough. I just couldn't face up to the wasting and not getting anywhere. And I went down to Hammond noticing, and he said, oh, well, have a ride on this horse, Oswald Destin, in a week's time, see how you get on. And he won. And but for him, I'd have packed up there and then. But he was a great governor.
Oswald Destin just with a fractional advantage over New Romney as they race up towards the line. It's Oswald Destin, John Francome.
And very few people start and finish a career with one man, but he was just a wonderful person. Couldn't speak highly enough of him.
Fred Winter succeeded in making racing history during the recent meeting at Sandown Park. Here's Fred, just before riding his 100th winner. And, by the way, he's the only jockey to reach a century in a national hunt season.
All the older generations say he was the greatest champion jockey for a number of years over jumps. And he didn't want to train, John, did he? He wanted to do other things. He only turned to training because they wouldn't let him become a jockey club official.
Yeah, he wanted to be a starter, but as a jockey, he used to tell this story about going down to Ron Smythe's, and just when helmets were coming into fashion, and he said, I turned up with a helmet and a whip, and Ron Smythe said to him, what's that? He said, well, it's my schooling helmet. He said, we don't want any soft jockeys here. And he said, I was daft enough. He said he turned around and put the helmet back in his car.
And it's Kilmore and Fred Winter, the leader from Wineborough, who's been second twice, coming to challenge him.
But he was special. Everybody that saw him ride said he was just incredibly strong. He was a little bit in the mould of Stan Mellor and Tony McCoy, but not as stylish. He used to get behind them. The ground was much heavier in those days than we have today. And, you know, horses start wandering around. He used to grip with those legs. And even late on, you know, we're probably talking into when he was 62, 63, we'd go up the schooling ground together, and if somebody wasn't there, I'd say, right, come on, you give me a lead on this, and he'd still go up and ride schooling. And he was a desperate man first thing in the mornings, you know, he was just like a bear with a sore head, but for the rest of the day, he was an absolute joy to ride for.
The older generation, again, remember him most as a jockey, not for the Gold Cups and the Champion Hurdles, but for his victory on a wonderful old horse called Mandarin in the Grand Steeplechase at Auteuil. And they remember that because the tack went very early on. He lost all steering, didn't he? The bit broke.
Yeah, the bit broke. They'd only jumped 2 fences, 3.5 mile race, and the French jockeys helped him. They kept the horse in.
So he basically had no steering because of that.
No steering, but, you know, with those legs, you know, he had a will of steel and his legs were even stronger. And he used to, you know, just be able to keep a horse in a straight line just because he rode so long.
And of all the great horses in Millionaires Row that you rode, which one was the best?
No doubt Killiney. I never actually rode him in a race, but he was killed at Ascot. But on what he could do at home and what I saw him do on the racecourse, we had champion hurdlers there, you know, Beulah, Lanzarote. We had the likes of Crisp and Salonin. This horse was head and shoulders above them.
Coming up towards the line, the crowd giving Killiney a tremendous reception. Are they seeing the Gold Cup winner of 1974? Well, he's striding away from a very useful horse in Bountiful Charles. Killiney is the winner. Bountiful Charles is second. It's going to be a very...
John, it's been great fun going down memory lane and talking about these great jockeys and horses. But for you, there was no doubt at all about your number one.
No, there were 9 I could have shuffled around in any order, but it was always going to be Fred Winter. Great man, great trainer, and without him, I'd probably still be cleaning cars.
In his very first months as a trainer, there was a telephone call from America. With laughable bravado, a young American amateur jockey, Tommy Smith, wanted to bring over a hunter, Jay Trump, and to win the Grand National. Fred responded to the outrageous dare.
Okay. Everything's all right.
The rest of the world thought all 3 of them potty. It was one thing to qualify for the National, another to get round intact, quite another to actually win it at the very first sighting. Winter plotted horse and boy round every hoofprint on the course.
Okay, we'll see where these tracks are here. That would do. But you're going to get horses jumping across a bit in front of you. So I mean, you've got to take a chance. There's no escaping it.
And they're off. Rondetto just a little bit slowly away, but he's all right. And as they run down towards the Melling Road, it's Peacetown, Veltrix and Cullenhouse and Feebo on the inside.
J. Trump, for America and Lambourne, and all eccentrics, kept surviving. Freddie, for Scotland, was carrying all the realists' money.
Heading now towards Valentine's with Rondetto 4 lengths the lead, Freddie in second place. J. Trump is now in third place. Rondetto, a great jump there in the lead. J. Trump just behind, together with Peacetown, a good jump there. Freddie and Rondetto's gone. Rondetto's a faller, leaving Freddie in the lead. There comes the dark cap of J. Trump, who's second.
And it's Scotland from America with England third at the moment. It's Freddie for Scotland on the inside of J. Trump for America. And these two are somewhere ahead of the towering Peacetown with Rainbow Battle trying to get on turns with them. Veltrix is making ground, and so's Mr. Jones. It's Freddie and J. Trump together. They're over stride for stride, these two. It's America and Scotland as they race towards the last bit. And the first to come under pressure is Freddie, getting a slap there from Pat McCarron. And it's Tommy Smith on J. Trump who jumps him ahead. It's J. Trump the leader from Freddie the favourite in second place. J. Trump going away from Freddie now. Rainbow Battle has jumped in third. Mr. Jones is fourth. And it's still J. Trump holding Freddie as they race towards the elbow. There's another 200 yards to run. And it's J. Trump and the favourite Freddie, and Freddie making ground again. Freddie coming on the stern side. It's going to be on here, I think. J. Trump on the far side, Freddie on the stern side. It's a desperate thing between these two. Freddie is still making ground. Freddie is making ground, but J. Trump is holding him. J. Trump still holding him at the line. He's just going to win it. J. Trump is the winner.
Young Smith's magnificent obsession had come to pass. And Fred Winter, in his very first year as a trainer, had shown he was still the master of Aintree. And just to prove it, he was to do it again the following year on Anglo.
So it was rather a fairy tale start. And you've got to make the most of those sort of turns when they come your way, you know.